Greetings. During the reign of Emperor Justinian, the Eastern Roman Empire managed to reclaim many territories lost during the previous centuries. North Africa, a significant portion of Italy, Dalmatia, southern Spain, and several Mediterranean islands. The Byzantine army played a crucial role in these successful conquests, which I will discuss in this video. The army of the Justinian era was significantly different from the army of the classical period. The familiar legions, cohorts, and aelae of old Rome had disappeared. The main combat unit became the tagma, or arithmos, consisting of 300 to 400 men commanded by a military comes. Several tagmata formed a moira, or chiliarchy. The entire army was divided into three main categories. The first was the guard, stationed in the capital, which included several subdivisions. Candidati, a unit of 500 men with the highest rank, subordinate to the Magister Officiorum. Scholarii, several units of 500 soldiers serving as the personal guard of the emperor. Excubitores, watchmen, a foot unit of 300 men composed of Isaurians. Domesticii, 2 units of infantry and cavalry, totaling 1,000 soldiers. Finally, the last subdivision was the protectores, defenders, 2 cavalry units totaling 1,000 men. This was typically the first place of service for the children of noble military families, and the unit itself was used during palace ceremonies. Next, the field army. It consisted of several subdivisions, which we can call armies. The first was commanded by the so-called First Commander-in-Chief, First Magister Militum, in Praesenti, whose residence was in Constantinople. The Second Army was led by the Second Commander-in-Chief with his residence in Nicaea. Additionally, there were 3 regional commands: the Magister Militum of the Eastern Army, the Army of Thrace, and the Army of Illyricum. Each of these units numbered between 20,000 and 25,000 men, bringing the total field army to over 100,000 soldiers. The limitanei were the border troops. There were 9 border districts on the southern border and 4 on the northern border, totaling around 190,000 personnel. Therefore, as can be easily calculated, the entire Byzantine army consisted of about 350,000 personnel. The field army and border troops included units of various origins. Primarily, there were the so-called comitatenses, composed of subjects of the empire. Next were the foederati, troops recruited from the settled former barbarians along the borders. While the core of the foederati consisted of inhabitants of the empire of barbarian descent, ordinary citizens could also voluntarily join. Thus, these units were only conditionally considered barbarian, and by the end of the 6th century, they had largely merged with the rest of the army. Since 503 A.D., the core of foederati was commanded by a comes foederatorum. Allies were units of barbarians, Huns, Heruls, Goths, and others, who were obligated by treaty to provide military contingents under the command of their leaders in exchange for land or annual subsidies. Their share during the era of Justinian was relatively small, and they were used quite limitedly. Finally, there were the bucellarii, bodyguards, fighters from the private military retinues of Byzantine commanders, partially hired with their own funds. The Byzantine army consisted of cavalry and infantry, with cavalry gaining increasing importance over time. Cavalrymen were called cataphractarii, in imitation of the Persian heavy cavalry, although they were composed of 2 categories: spearmen, a significant portion of whom were armored and truly deserved this designation, and archers, who effectively constituted light cavalry. The infantry and cavalry were arranged in several ranks, with heavily armed spearmen in the front, protostats, and rear uragi rank, while archery, lacking protective armor, were positioned between them. The heavily armed infantryman was equipped with a spear, known as a lancia, and a cavalry sword called a spatha. The lancia was a spear, initially only for cavalry, up to 2.5 meters long, with a leaf-shaped tip. The spatha was a sword measuring up to 1 meter in length, with a blade width ranging from 4 to 5 centimeters and weighing up to 2 kilograms. From Roman times, the army retained the plumbata as well as the pilum. The plumbata was a short dart, weighted with a lead head, and typically equipped with feathers to improve its aerodynamic properties. The pilum was a throwing weapon made of a wooden shaft and a metal tip, equal in length to the shaft. The shaft was embedded halfway into the tip, resulting in an overall length of about 1.5 to 2 meters. However, during the era of Justinian, the pilum evolved slightly, becoming a bit lighter and acquiring the new name spiculum. Some researchers believe that spiculum is simply another name for the pilum. The archer's weapons were borrowed from the Huns. Some new types of weapons were adopted from the Germans, among which the most popular was the large knife called a sax, or its slightly longer variant, the scramasax, as well as the battle axe known as the francisca. In the picture, a senior officer of the scholarii is depicted in full gear. He is wearing a muscle cuirass, segmental arm guards, and a round shield with a scaly surface. In his right hand he holds a sword, the spatha. In the next image is an excubitor. The soldier is clad in lamellar armor, wearing a late Roman helmet, and holding a round shield of the old type, clypeus, a spear, hasta, and an axe. On his belt hangs a knife, the scramasax. This picture shows a German mercenary. The characteristic elements of the German warrior's armament include a scramasax knife hanging from his belt, a heavy battle axe, a type of francisca, and a wide periscalis, a type of trousers worn by Eastern Germans. On the head of the officer in the Illyrian army is a composite helmet of Germanic style, with chainmail reinforced by a breastplate. He wears a yellow cloak with insignia indicating rank. He is armed with a long spear, a francisca, a scramasax, and a heavy sword, which is not shown in the illustration. In the illustration of the protostat, a frontline fighter, a long chainmail covers his entire body, except for his arms, which are protected by segmental metal arm guards. A metal crest on the helmet indicates the warrior's rank. His offensive weaponry includes a spiculum, a Celtic-type spear, a scramasax, and a sword, which is also not depicted in the illustration. Of course, a discussion about the Byzantine army would be incomplete without mentioning one of the most important elements of any army, its commander. Justinian was fortunate to have two outstanding generals to realize his plans for the restoration of the empire, Flavius Belisarius and Narses. Belisarius led the army during the conquest of the Vandal kingdom, commanded the forces that defeated the Ostrogoths, and successfully fought against the Persians. However, when Justinian fell ill with the plague during an epidemic in Constantinople, envious military leaders accused him of attempting to usurp power during the emperor's illness, and Justinian stripped Belisarius of all his possessions. Although Justinian soon pardoned Belisarius, the tragedy of the great general so impressed painters that it inspired them to create several works on the subject. I present two paintings with the same title, Belisarius Asking for Alms, by Jacques-Louis David and François Vincent, as well as the work Belisarius Welcomed into a Peasant Family, by Jean-François Peyron. Finally, we likely know what the great general looked like. Many researchers believe that in the already mentioned fresco in San Vitale in Ravenna, the bearded man to the right of Justinian is indeed Belisarius. Narses was born in Armenia, which was then part of the Sasanian Empire, and ended up in Constantinople as a slave. He was castrated and became a eunuch, but due to his natural abilities, he made a brilliant career and became one of the emperor's closest officials. At the age of 74, he led a campaign against the Ostrogoths, which ended in a resounding victory for the Byzantines. Scholars suggest that he is also depicted in the fresco in San Vitale. He is the man standing in senator's robes over the emperor's left shoulder. Justinian's conquests, however, were short-lived, and after his reign, the empire fell into decline. The prestige of the empire was significantly undermined. Previously, barbarian kings proudly bore the title of patricians, seriously considering the emperor as their suzerain. Before the conquests, this was even reflected in coinage. On coins minted by the barbarians, we can see depictions of emperors. However, as a result of Justinian's conquests, barbarian kings began to see themselves not as vassals of the empire, but as independent rulers, hostile to Byzantium. Therefore, after these conquests, we see images of their own kings on barbarian coins. Ultimately, the empire became so weakened that it became an easy target for the rising Islamic world. With that, I conclude my account. Goodbye.